right, we're working through the architecture of a linked list and an array list. We've implemented the linked list and the array list except for the array list iterator. In this video, what we're going to do is implement the array list iterator, and then we'll move on to writing the test for the array list as well. Finally, we'll compare the performance of those two different architectures. All right, so let's go over to Eclipse and start working on the iterator. Already we have it stubbed out here. It is a private class, which is a member of our array list class. We know we need has next, next, add, remove, and set. And the way that we'll do this is we'll keep track just of an integer, which is the next index that we're going to look at. So we'll keep track of an an instance variable called next index. We'll also keep track of a private Boolean variable is after next. So that we keep track of, we make sure our behavior is correct. And the next index can be private as well. All right, so has next then becomes just a question of whether or not we have gone too far. And we can simply return whether or not the next index is greater than our size. Rather than returning false all the time, we'll say if our next index is less than our size, then we do have something coming up next. That's pretty easy. Just make sure that our iterator's position hasn't gone too large. When it actually comes time to call next in our iterator, what we're going to do is we are going to check to make sure that there is a next element. If there isn't, then we'll throw a no such element exception. And if there is an element, then we're going to increase our index. We're going to say is after next is true because we just walked over something. And we're going to return the data element at data index -1 because we just incremented it before we returned it. So we need to subtract 1 there. Easy enough. Similarly, in add, we can just use that next index as well in order to put an element into the position where we're interested in. Now we also have to check capacity here to make sure that as we add something, we have enough space in the array that's been allocated. So first we'll call check capacity to prep for adding something to our array. And if it's time to add something, then we'll go ahead and shift everything up 1. Now we're in the middle of our array, so we don't go all the way down to 0. We stop at next index. So going from the end of our array down to next index, we move everything to the right 1. Once everything has been shifted right, we set our next index element equal to element. So this is where we insert the element that we're interested in. We increase our next index to point to the next element in our array, and we increase size by 1. Very similar to the way you add something to the list without an iterator. In the same way that add is similar without an iterator, remove is also similar to removing something without an iterator. First, we check to make sure that we have moved over something to make sure our behavior is consistent, and if not, we throw in a legal state exception. We save the element that we're going to remove, which is the pointer to the index right before where we are, and then we slide everything down. We say everything that is on top of the next index, we move everything to the left, bumping it down. We reduce next index by 1, we reduce the size of our array by 1, and we say that we are no longer right after having called next. Finally, we return the element that we just saw. Our set method is easy as well because we use next index as our the index that we want to set an element of. We say if we have walked over something, then we can go ahead and set the position that we are looking at now equal to the data that we would like to have it set to. Save all that, and that is the implementation of our array list iterator. The next thing that we need to do is we need to evaluate it to see whether our test works or not. And so before I do that, I'm just going to clean up my Java doc, my references to CS30. Save it up. In our next video, we'll run a test of our array list, just like we ran a test of our linked list. Thank you for your attention.